The gods said, Mañjuśrī, what is the gateway to all dharmas? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, the relative truth which employs all form of statements, speech, cognition, objects of cognition, activities, conventions, and acts, is a gateway to all dharmas. The ultimate truth, which is so because it is the opposite of all forms of speech, statements, cognition, objects of cognition, activities, conventions, and acts, is a gateway of all dharmas, gateway to all dharmas. Moreover, Divine Son, on the relative level, the incorrect conceptual workings of the mind are a gateway to samsara. On the relative level, the correct conceptual workings of the mind are a gateway to nirvana. On the relative level, doubt is a gateway to obscuration. On the relative level, liberation is a gateway to the absence of obscuration. On the relative level, conceptuality is a gateway to disturbing emotions. On the relative level, non-conceptuality is a gateway to the absence of disturbing emotions. On a relative level, distraction is a gateway to thought. On the relative level, tranquility is a gateway to peace. On the relative level, holding views is a gateway to pride. On the relative level, emptiness is a gateway to the absence of pride. On the relative level, relying on evil company is a gateway to all roots of non-virtue. On the relative level, relying on a virtuous spiritual friend is a gateway to all roots of virtue. On the relative level, wrong view is a gateway to all suffering. On the relative level, correct view is a gateway to all happiness. On the relative level, miserliness is a gateway to poverty. On the relative level, generosity is a gateway to wealth. On the relative level, a bad character is a gateway to all lower realms. On the relative level, discipline is a gateway to all human and divine births. On the relative level, ill will is a gateway to an ugly appearance. On the relative level, patience is a gateway to a beautiful appearance. On the relative level, laziness is a gateway to a lack of realization. On the relative level, diligence is a gateway to realization. On the relative level, thought is a gateway to agitation. On the relative level, concentration is a gateway to pliability of mind. On the relative level, faulty knowledge is a gateway to a lack of understanding. On the relative level, knowledge is a gateway to the 37 factors of awakening. On the relative level, love is a gateway to not becoming angry. On the relative level, great compassion is a gateway to an altruistic mind. On the relative level, an altruistic mind is a gateway to the absence of deceit. On the relative level, joy is a gateway to conviction in the Dharma. On the relative level, equanimity is a gateway to being free from all faults. On the relative level, the applications of mindfulness are a gateway to not letting any roots of virtue diminish. On the relative level, the thorough relinquishments are a gateway to genuine perseverance. On the relative level, the bases of miracular power are a gateway to pliancy of body and mind. On the relative level, the faculties are a gateway to attaining faith. On the relative level, the powers are a gateway to conquering all disturbing emotions. On the relative level, the Eightfold Path of the Noble Ones is a gateway to transcending all unwholesome paths. Moreover, Divine Son, on the relative level, the mind set on awakening is a gateway to all Buddha qualities. On the relative level, upholding the sacred Dharma is a gateway to becoming a lord of all dharmas. On the relative level, ripening beings is a gateway to upholding the sacred Dharma. On the relative level, method is a gateway to becoming learned regarding the correct and incorrect. On the relative level, the perfection of knowledge is a gateway to nirvana. On the ultimate level, the unarisen is a gateway to all dharmas. The gods said, Mañjuśrī, what is the gateway to the utterly unborn? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, on the ultimate level, the utterly unarisen is a gateway in every way. The god said, Mañjuśrī, what is the nature of the utterly unarisen? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, on the ultimate level, the utterly unreal is the nature of the utterly unarisen. The god said, Mañjuśrī, does the utterly unarisen have any divisions? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, what do you think? Does the sky have any divisions? The god answered, No, Mañjuśrī, it does not. Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, it is the same way. Just as the sky does not have any divisions, so, Divine Son, does the utterly unborn also not have any divisions? The god said, Mañjuśrī, do you comprehend the utterly unarisen on the ultimate level? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, the utterly unarisen does not comprehend the utterly unarisen. And why? Because, Divine Son, all phenomena are utterly unborn, utterly unarisen, and utterly unreal. The god asked, Mañjuśrī, are you this eloquent because you know and understand any phenomena whatsoever? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, what do you think? Does an echo make a sound because it knows phenomena? The god replied, Mañjuśrī, of course an echo does not know any phenomena. Instead, on the relative level, the sound appears from circumstances. Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, in the same way, based on the circumstance of observing all beings, on the relative level a bodhisattva great being speaks without speaking. The god asked, Mañjuśrī, on what basis do you teach? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, on what type of emanation does the thus gone one base himself as he teaches? The god said, Mañjuśrī, the thus gone one does not ultimately base himself on any emanation whatsoever. Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, in the same way, on the ultimate level, without basing myself on any phenomena, I teach without teaching. The god said, Mañjuśrī, if, on the ultimate level, without basing yourself on any phenomena, you teach without teaching, on what basis do you awaken to unexcelled and completely perfect Buddhahood? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, I base myself on the acts with immediate consequence, and, without awakening to completely perfect Buddhahood, I awaken to unexcelled and completely perfect Buddhahood. The god said, How do you base yourself on the acts without immediate consequence? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, ultimately the acts with immediate consequence do not truly exist and do not have any substance. It is on them that I base myself without basing myself. The god said, Mañjuśrī, the thus gone one has explained that beings are born in hell because of committing the acts with immediate consequence. Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, the thus gone one has explained that beings are born in hell because of committing the acts with immediate consequence. In the same way, Divine Son, the thus gone one teaches without teaching how to quickly awaken to unexcelled and completely perfect Buddhahood, when basing oneself on the acts with immediate consequence, without basing oneself on the acts with immediate consequence. The god said, Mañjuśrī, what are the acts with immediate consequence? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, the acts with immediate consequence are those by which the bodhisattva great beings quickly, without awakening to unexcelled and completely perfect Buddhahood, perfectly awaken. Such are the acts with immediate consequence of the bodhisattva great beings. Divine Son, you may wonder what the 5 acts with immediate consequence are. Well, Divine Son, the first act with immediate consequence of the bodhisattva great beings is as follows. When a bodhisattva great being with pure motivation, without developing, has developed the mind set on unexcelled and completely perfect Buddhahood, he does not develop the mindset that aims for the level of the hearers, solitary Buddhas, anyone with reference points, or the extremists. Moreover, Divine Son, the second act with immediate consequence of the bodhisattva great beings is as follows. Divine Son, when a bodhisattva great being, without producing, has produced a mind set on giving up all possessions, he will not entertain any feelings of miserliness until he reaches the essence of enlightenment. Moreover, Divine Son, the third act with immediate consequence of the bodhisattva grade beings is as follows. Divine Son, when a bodhisattva grade being without producing has produced a mindset that thinks, I will protect all beings in any possible way, he will not yield from that. Moreover, Divine Son, the fourth act with immediate consequence of the bodhisattva grade beings is as follows. Divine Son, when a bodhisattva grade being without attaining forbearance has attained the forbearance that understands that ultimately all phenomena are utterly unborn, utterly unarisen, and utterly unreal, he will not engender any clinging to substance, essence, or actuality. Moreover, Divine Son, the fifth act with immediate consequence of the bodhisattva grade beings is as follows. Moreover, Divine Son, the fifth act with immediate consequence of the bodhisattva grade beings is as follows. Divine Son, when a bodhisattva grade being without engendering has engendered the mindset that thinks, I will fully understand all phenomena by means of momentary knowledge, he will not rest under any circumstance until he has obtained, without obtaining, the wisdom of omniscience that is endowed with all supreme features. By abiding in this way without abiding, the bodhisattva grade being quickly and perfectly awakens, without ultimately awakening, to unexcelled and completely perfect Buddhahood. The gods said, Mañjuśrī, those acts of immediate consequence that cause ordinary childish beings to be born in hell are the very acts that cause a bodhisattva grade being to awaken to unexcelled and perfectly complete Buddhahood, without perfectly awakening. Is that correct? Mañjuśrī said, Yes, Divine Son, it is. And why, Divine Son? Ultimately all phenomena are utter emptiness. Divine Son, understanding this utter emptiness is awakening. Yet, ultimately awakening is not the way that it is expressed through words. Divine Son, ultimately all phenomena are utterly signless. Divine Son, understanding this utter signlessness is awakening. Yet ultimately awakening is not the way that it is expressed through words. Divine Son, ultimately all phenomena are utterly wishlessness. Utter wishlessness. Divine Son, understanding this utter wishlessness is awakening. Yet ultimately awakening is not the way it is expressed through words. Divine Son, ultimately all phenomena do not exist as something that can be apprehended whatsoever. Divine Son, understanding this state of being beyond something to apprehend whatsoever is awakening. Yet, ultimately awakening is not the way that it is expressed through words. Divine Son, ultimately all phenomena are utterly beyond formation. Divine Son, understanding this state where phenomena are utterly beyond formation is awakening. Yet ultimately awakening is not the way that it is expressed through words. Divine Son, ultimately all phenomena are utterly unconditioned. Divine Son, understanding this utterly unconditioned state is awakening. Yet ultimately awakening is not the way that it is expressed through words. Divine Son, ultimately all phenomena are utterly unseen. Divine Son, understanding this state of being utterly unseen is awakening. Yet ultimately awakening is not the way that it is expressed through words. Divine Son, ultimately all phenomena are utterly unborn. Divine Son, understanding this utterly unborn state is awakening, yet ultimately awakening is not the way that it is expressed through words. Divine Son, ultimately all phenomena are utterly unarisen. Divine Son, understanding this utterly unarisen state is awakening, yet ultimately awakening is not the way that it is expressed through words. Divine Son, ultimately all phenomena are utterly unreal. Divine Son, understanding this state of being utterly unreal is awakening. Yet ultimately awakening is not the way that it is expressed through words. The God said,
Are you a single Christian woman?
The God
Is that you either have to end up alone or settle? I know for me,
The God then asked, Mañjuśrī, who will have faith in this Dharma teaching? Mañjuśrī replied, Divine Son, since ultimately even the dusk-gone one does not have faith, forget about the hearers, solitary Buddhas, and all the extremists who rely on reference points. The god asked him, who will gain conviction in it? Mañjuśrī said, those who are ultimately not attached to any phenomena will gain conviction. The god asked him, who will apply it earnestly? Mañjuśrī said, those who ultimately do not earnestly apply themselves to any phenomena. The god asked him, who will become realized? Mañjuśrī said, those who ultimately do not realize any phenomena. The god asked him, Mañjuśrī, who are those who ultimately do not realize any phenomena? Mañjuśrī answered, Divine Son, those who on the relative level realize the omniscient wisdom that is endowed with the supreme of all aspects. The god said, Mañjuśrī, what kind of nature do they have? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, ultimately they have the utterly unborn nature. The god asked him, Mañjuśrī, in whose hands will a sutra such as this stand up? Mañjuśrī replied, Divine Son, relatively in the hands of those who offer the sacred Dharma to all beings. The god said, Mañjuśrī, how will they abide? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, ultimately they will abide in the utterly unborn, the utterly unarisen, and the utterly unreal. The god asked, Mañjuśrī, in which way will they proceed? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, ultimately they will proceed from the utterly unborn, the utterly unarisen, and the utterly unreal. The god said, Mañjuśrī, how will the irreversible bodhisattva great being attain awakening? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, whoever is an irreversible bodhisattva great being has no chance and no opportunity not to attain awakening. The god said, Mañjuśrī, what should the bodhisattva great beings turn back from? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, ultimately the bodhisattva great beings turn back from thoughts. They turn back from the levels of all the hearers, solitary Buddhas, and extremists who rely on reference points. The god said, Mañjuśrī, what does a bodhisattva great being not turn back from? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, bodhisattva great beings do not turn back from all phenomena being the same and being utterly unrisen. If you wonder why, it is because ultimately all phenomena are the same and being utterly unarisen, and the bodhisattva great beings are the same. That is why they do not turn back. The god asked, when one speaks of the sameness of all phenomena and being utterly unarisen, Mañjuśrī, what phenomena is that a designation for? Mañjuśrī said, the sameness of all phenomena and being utterly unarisen designates that ultimately there is no diversity. The god said, Mañjuśrī, how does the sameness of all phenomena and being utterly unarisen manifest as diversity? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, whoever conceptualizes the sameness of all phenomena and being utterly unarisen and ultimately having substance, materiality, and essence will ultimately experience diversity. As for ultimately experiencing diversity, it develops into many views involving reference points. Those who hold these many views that involve reference points wander helplessly in all various forms of existence. Divine Son, whoever does not conceptualize the sameness of all phenomena as not occurring as ultimately having substance, materiality, and essence, does not ultimately not experience diversity. Since he ultimately does not experience diversity, he ultimately understands the totally unreal. In this way, he comes to understand that all phenomena ultimately are the same in being characterized as being utterly unborn. The god asked, Mañjuśrī, is there a method that can awaken a bodhisattva great being with disturbing emotions, but not someone without disturbing emotions? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, there is, Divine Son, relatively, all phenomena continuously emerge and disappear. In this way, the awakening of bodhisattva great beings also appears relatively, and why? Divine Son, ultimately all phenomena are without disturbing emotions, unborn and unceasing. Any phenomena that is utterly unborn and unceasing is also ultimately beyond being realized. It will never be realized, nor was it ever realized. And why, Divine Son? Because ultimately all phenomena are utterly unborn. Therefore, Divine Son, through such a method a bodhisattva grade being with disturbing emotions can awaken, yet someone who is devoid of disturbing emotions cannot. The god said, Mañjuśrī, is there a method by which a bodhisattva grade being who is miserly can complete the perfection of generosity, yet those who are generous cannot? Mañjuśrī said, Yes, Divine Son, there is a method by which a miserly bodhisattva grade being can complete the perfection of generosity, yet those who are generous cannot. And why? Because to never let go of or cast away any sentient being or any of the Buddha qualities on the relative level is the miserliness of the bodhisattva grade beings. Because to never let go of or cast away any sentient being or any of the Buddha qualities on the relative level is the miserliness of the bodhisattva grade beings. The god said, Mañjuśrī, is there a method by which a bodhisattva grade being who is ill-behaved can complete the perfection of discipline, yet those who are disciplined cannot?
It's true. You were victimized by that person, but you're now victimized yourself.
Mañjuśrī said, There is, Divine Son, when a bodhisattva grade being avoids superficial discipline in order to ripen beings, there is the perfection of discipline of a bodhisattva grade being on the relative level. The god said, Mañjuśrī, is there a method of patience for a bodhisattva grade being who has forsaken patience? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, there is. Any bodhisattva grade being who ultimately has no patience with any phenomena having substance, actuality, or essence is in fact in an ineffable manner in possession of the supreme patience. Divine Son, in a manner free from reference points, that is the supreme patience of a bodhisattva grade being. The god said, Mañjuśrī, is there a method by which a lazy bodhisattva grade being can be diligent? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, there is. A lazy bodhisattva grade being is unlike those diligent hearers, solitary Buddhas, and extremists who employ an easy form of diligence that involves focus. The god said, Mañjuśrī, is there a method by which a bodhisattva grade being who is forgetful can rest in equipoise? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, there is. A bodhisattva grade being who even in his sleep does not give rise to thoughts of substance, essence, or actuality on the ultimate level, is resting in equipoise in a manner devoid of reference points. The god said, Mañjuśrī, is there a method by which a bodhisattva grade being who has no knowledge can come to possess great knowledge? Mañjuśrī said, Divine Son, there is. And why? Divine Son, ultimately all phenomena are discerned by knowledge. However, when one searches for phenomena, they disappear and cannot be observed. Knowledge is also like that. Ultimately, it also does not exist and cannot be observed. Therefore, relatively, one speaks of possessing knowledge, even though that knowledge is ultimately utterly unborn. Divine Son, according to that method, a bodhisattva grade being who has no knowledge is called one who possesses great knowledge, or one who possesses especially exalted knowledge, or one who possesses sacred knowledge, or one who lays hold of knowledge, or one who possesses a knowledge devoid of a focus. Ultimately, things are not as they are described. The Blessed One now addressed Mañjuśrī Kumara Buddha. Excellent, he said, excellent, excellent. Mañjuśrī, you have spoken well and explained without explaining the acts and non-acts of bodhisattva grade beings. Mañjuśrī, for a starving person, feeble and thin, it is better to suffer, and thus not to unknowingly eat poisonous food. In the same way, Mañjuśrī, it is better for bodhisattva grade beings to engage in non-conceptual miserliness, bad behavior, ill will, laziness, forgetfulness, and lack of knowledge, and thus not engage in the conceptual application of generosity, discipline, patience, diligence, and concentration, and knowledge of the hearers and solitary Buddhas who rely on reference points. Why? Because the latter gives rise to the faults of poisonous reference points, and this must therefore be understood to be a danger on the relative level. At this point, the god Excellent Rule Asked the Blessed One, Blessed One, are bodhisattva great beings not afraid of disturbing emotions? The Blessed One replied, Divine Son, relatively bodhisattva great beings do fear disturbing emotions, but far more they fear the mindset of the hearers and solitary Buddhas who rely on reference points. Their fear of disturbing emotions is not comparable. The God asked, Blessed One, why is that? The Blessed One answered, Divine Son, that is something you should ask yourself. Why not explain it yourself as best you can? Divine Son, what do you think? If a person wishes to survive, would that person's greatest fear be having his limbs severed or his head cut off? The God replied, Blessed One, someone who loses his limbs could still survive. Thus, if he wanted to acquire merit, he could still take up and follow a meritorious path, which in turn would be a cause for taking birth in the higher realms. However, Blessed One, someone who had his head cut off would be unable to survive. In this way, even if he strove for merit, he would be unable to genuinely follow a meritorious path. The Blessed One said, Divine Son, similarly, for bodhisattva great beings, it is better to conduct themselves without reference points, even if it involves transgression, and thus not have the qualities and trainings of those who fall into the views of hearers and solitary Buddhas who rely on reference points. It is better to be a miserly bodhisattva and thus not abandon all sentient beings, or even cast away all the qualities of a Buddha. It is better to be an ill-behaved bodhisattva great being rather than someone who fails to ripen others. It is better to be a bodhisattva great being who faithfully practices on the level of action with conviction in the absence of focus, yet has disturbing emotions, than to be a hearer or solitary Buddha who relies on reference points, who attains certainty and is free from disturbing emotions. The God said, Blessed One, the acts of the bodhisattva great beings, which are non-acts, are at odds with the entire world. Blessed One, when the poisonous faults of reference points have formed, the discipline of the hearers and solitary Buddhas who rely on reference points becomes an unwholesome state for bodhisattva great beings. No matter how diligent the hearers and solitary Buddhas who rely on reference points are, the poisonous faults of reference points have been formed, and thus their diligence is inferior to the laziness of the bodhisattva great beings. The Blessed One said, Divine Son, just as the food of a destitute man is poison for a universal monarch, likewise, Divine Son, are the discipline and diligence of the hearers and solitary Buddhas who rely on reference points for ill-behaved and lazy bodhisattva great beings. And why? Because of involving the poisonous faults of reference points. Divine Son, just as the wealth of a person who is only concerned with his personal achievements is not sufficient to ensure the well-being of a whole city, likewise, Divine Son, the diligence of those who have the impoverished, inferior, and conceptual attitude of the hearers and solitary Buddhas is unable to liberate even the beings here in Jambudvipa, let alone liberate all beings. Divine Son, just as a leader who lovingly and compassionately grants great wealth and enjoyment to others may use his wealth to accomplish the happiness and limitless beings in order to give all beings unsurpassed happiness, so likewise, Divine Son, whoever develops the superior attitude of the bodhisattva great beings and inspires all beings with knowledge, means, great love, and compassion, will ripen limitless beings through his diligence beyond focus and the great wealth of the accumulations of merit and wisdom, gathered over limitless trillions of great aeons. Without settling, then, he will even settle all beings in omniscience. Venerable Mahāyāna now addressed the Blessed One. Blessed One, he said, the hearers actualize all unconditioned phenomena, while, Blessed One, bodhisattva great beings are classified under conditioned phenomena. How can that outshine all the hearers and solitary Buddhas who rely on reference points, who are included under the unconditioned? The Blessed One answered him, Kashyap, I will give you an analogy that illustrates this. Some people need an analogy to understand the meaning expressed by a skilled being. It is like this. Imagine the 4 great oceans were filled with butter. Then imagine that someone were to extract a drop of butter from the oceans using the very tip of a hair split into 1/100ths. Do you think, Kashyapa, that the drop of butter extracted with the very tip of a hair split into 1/100ths would be able to outshine the 4 great oceans filled with butter? Kashyapa said, "No, Blessed One, they would not. Blissful One, they would not." The Blessed One asked, "Moreover, Kashyapa, which one among the 2 would be largest, best, foremost, and most valuable?" Kashyapa replied, "Blessed One, even 1/1,000,000th of a single ocean would be, Blessed One, much larger, better, exalted, and valuable than a single drop. Blessed One, the drop that was extracted using the very tip of a hair split into 1/100ths could not compare to that, let alone the great 4 oceans." The Blessed One said, "In the same way as this analogy, the unconditioned wisdom of the hearers and solitary Buddhas who rely on reference points is as insignificant as a drop of butter that was extracted from the very tip of a hair split into 1/100ths, since it involves reference points." Kashyapa, the bodhisattva great beings are similar to the 4 great oceans filled with butter in this analogy. They are free from reference points. They are endowed with all supreme features of engaging without engaging, the level of faithful practice. They embody all accumulations of merit and wisdom. Without viewing, they view conditioned wisdom. Moreover, through the blazing fire of the ultimate, they ripen beings and thereby transform them, without relying on reference points, into the omniscient wisdom that is endowed with all supreme aspects. Kashyapa, this is how the bodhisattva great beings, without relying on reference points, outshine the hearers and solitary Buddhas who rely on reference points, and who have attained the unconditioned. Kashyapa, as another analogy, imagine a city that contains hundreds of thousands of semi-precious trinkets. At the same time, there is a boat in the ocean that easily and effortlessly brings to land precious and valuable gemstones of beryl. Now, what do you think? Could the semi-precious stones found in the city outshine the precious gemstones of beryl? Kashyapa replied, "Blessed One, it could not. Blissful One, it could not." The Blessed One said, "Kashyapa, just like the semi-precious Kashyapa, just like the semi-precious trinkets found in the city, so should you view the hearers and solitary Buddhas who rely on reference points in their attainment of the unconditioned. Kashyapa, just like the most valuable gemstones of beryl which are first discovered in the ocean, then boarded onto the ship and easily and effortlessly arrive at the trading house, so, Kashyapa, should you view the bodhisattva great beings who arrive at the trading houses in the city of cyclic existence, and, without establishing anyone, establish all beings in unsurpassed and completely perfect awakening. Kashyapa, consider a further analogy. During the 3rd month of spring, the entire land is filled with crops. If at that time a small insect should carry off a single grain to eat, what would be larger, the single grain or all the grains found in the entire land? Kashyapa answered, "Blessed One, the entire world filled with crops would have an infinitely greater pile of grains, with which would be able to nourish uncountable limitless beings. At the same time, Blessed One, the single grain that the small insect carried off to eat could not even sustain a single being." The Blessed One said, "Kashyapa, you should see the result that is the undefiled liberation of all hearers, and solitary Buddhas who rely on reference points as being just like the single grain that the small insect carried off to eat. On the other hand, Kashyapa, it is as being like the entire earth filled with crops that you should see, Kashyapa, the crops of the bodhisattva great beings, roots of virtue. They are the accumulations of merit and wisdom that in an unsurpassed manner embody the entire Buddha Dharma, such as the 6 perfections, by means of abiding without abiding within the relative and ultimate truths. When they have ripened, the bliss of the unsurpassed wisdom that is endowed with the supreme of all aspects becomes, in a manner that is beyond reference points, the sustenance of all beings. Venerable Mahākāśyapa explained to the Blessed One, "Blessed One, that is amazing. Blissful One, that is amazing. It is exactly as the Blessed One has explained without explaining, Blessed One. That is how the bodhisattva great beings, by means of the unsurpassed wisdom beyond focus, which is endowed with the supreme of all aspects, engage in, without engaging in, the level of faithful practice, and thereby outshine the hearers and solitary Buddhas who rely on reference points. The bodhisattva great beings from the Buddha realm of the thus gone one Ratnaketu, who had arrived here in the Saha world together with noble Mañjuśrī, now address the Blessed One. Blessed One, it is like this. The instructions of the hearers and solitary Buddhas who rely on reference points, such as a way to abandon disturbing emotions and determine downfalls, are all conceptual and specific instructions that involve reference points. In the Buddha realm of the blessed, thus gone worthy, perfect Buddha Ratnaketu, there are no such instructions that involve reference points. Such instructions that involve focus do not exist there. Instead, Blessed One, the beings there listen without listening to the pure instructions of the Bodhisattva great beings. They listen without listening to the irreversible instructions. They listen without listening to the instructions beyond reference points. They listen without listening to the instructions on how all phenomena are ultimately utterly unborn. They listen without listening to the instructions on how all phenomena are ultimately utterly unarisen. The blessed, thus gone worthy, perfect Buddha Śākyamuni underwent great hardship, having patience with so much suffering and understanding that ultimately all phenomena are utterly unborn. He taught the higher, middling, and lower Dharma. It is like this. Ultimately all phenomena are utterly unborn, utterly unarisen, and utterly unreal. However, from this single identity that all phenomena share on the ultimate level, the Blessed One teaches a Dharma without teaching, in many ways, in order to accommodate the reference points of beings. The Bodhisattva great beings then begin to venerate the blessed, thus gone worthy, perfect Buddha Śākyamuni with exquisite offerings such as divine flowers, fragrant herbs, incense, flower garlands, unguents, powders, robes, parasols, standards, banners, and canopies with victory banners. They addressed Mañjuśrī Kumarabhuta. Mañjuśrī, they said, we will now proceed to Jewel World. Mañjuśrī told them, children of noble family, if you know that the time has come to leave, then do so. The Bodhisattva great beings asked him, Mañjuśrī, are you not coming with us? Mañjuśrī replied, children of noble family, all Buddha realms are a single Buddha realm. Likewise, all Buddhas are a single Buddha. Likewise, all Dharmas are a single Dharma. Likewise, all beings are a single being. Since there are no differences between these children of noble family, I will also go there. The Bodhisattva great beings asked, Mañjuśrī, in what way are all of the Buddha realms a single Buddha realm? Mañjuśrī, in what way are all the Buddhas a single Buddha? Mañjuśrī, in what way are all Dharmas a single Dharma? Mañjuśrī, in what way are all beings a single being? Mañjuśrī answered, children of noble family, none of the Buddha realms are realms. Why? Because ultimately they are utterly unborn. Children of noble family, none of the Buddhas are Buddhas. Why? Because ultimately they are utterly unarisen. Children of noble family, none of the Dharmas are Dharmas. Why? Because ultimately they are utterly unreal. Children of noble family, no beings are beings. Why? Because ultimately they are all utterly and entirely unarisen. With these words, Mañjuśrī Kumarabhuta caused the trichiliocosm to appear precisely without any difference, like the jewel world of the blessed, thus gone Ratnaketu. As he had thus fulfilled his intention, he rested evenly in absorption. Then the Bodhisattva great beings also saw the blessed, thus gone worthy, perfect Buddha Ratnaketu, and the jewel world. In fact, the Bodhisattva great beings all thought that they had arrived in the jewel world. Looking at the blessed, thus gone, worthy, perfect Buddha Śākyamuni, they saw him in the precise colors and shape of the blessed, thus gone Ratnaketu. Even the great hearers thought that they had become bodhisattva great beings. The bodhisattva great beings, who thought that they were beholding Ratnaketu, asked the blessed, thus gone Śākyamuni, "Blessed One, who has brought us to this jewel world?" The blessed Śākyamuni asked them, "Children of noble family, who has led you?" The bodhisattva great beings replied, "Blessed One, Mañjuśrī Buddha has led us." The blessed Śākyamuni said, "Children of noble family, Mañjuśrī Buddha has brought you here without coming and going." Mañjuśrī Buddha told the bodhisattva great beings, "Children of noble family, to find out where you are being led to, and from where you are being led, look with your equipoise." When the bodhisattva great beings each looked with their meditative absorption, they saw that they had never moved from this saha world. Amazed, they were full of astonishment and exclaimed, "Although we never got up from our seats, we thought that we had traveled to the jewel world. But it was Mañjuśrī who has caused all of it by means of his inconceivable blessing without blessing." They then added, "Blessed One, may all beings also attain this blessing in a manner beyond reference points." Then the blessed Śākyamuni spoke to the bodhisattva great beings. "Children of noble family, consider this analogy. Space contains the earth, and also wood, zinc, copper, silver, gold, and as well gems, pearls, beryls, conch, crystal, and coral, cat's eyes, conch shells that coil to the right, and red pearls, so that all these are contained within space. Yet, at the same time, children of noble family, although relatively there are of course different items contained, space itself remains undifferentiated. And why? Because ultimately space is utterly unreal. Likewise, children of noble family, ultimately all phenomena are surely utterly unborn, utterly unrisen, and utterly unreal. And yet, through the relative conditions of the world, they are imputed and designated in a conventional manner. This is form, this is feeling, this is perception, this is formation, this is consciousness, these are sense fields, these are the elements, this is the jewel of the Buddha, this is the jewel of the Dharma, this is the jewel of the Sangha, this is the vehicle of the hearers, this is the vehicle of the solitary Buddhas, this is the unexcelled vehicle, these are the paths of the 10 virtuous actions, these are the paths of the 10 non-virtuous actions, these are the hell beings, these are the animal existences, these are the abodes of the hungry spirits, these are demigods, these are humans, these are gods who experience desire, these are gods who experience form, these are gods who experience the formless, this is the desire realm, this is the form realm, this is the formless realm, these are good physical actions, these are good verbal actions, these are good mental actions, this is the perfection of generosity, this is the perfection of discipline, this is the perfection of patience, this is the perfection of diligence, this is the perfection of concentration, this is the perfection of knowledge, this is the perfection of skillful means, this is the perfection of aspirations, this is the perfection of strength, this is the perfection of wisdom. These are the 10 levels, the 10 powers, the 10 strengths of the bodhisattvas, the 10 strengths of the thus gone ones, the fourfold fearlessnesses, the 4 genuine discriminations, the 5 faculties, the 5 powers, the 18 unique qualities of a Buddha, the omniscient wisdom that is endowed with the supreme of all aspects, the awakening of a Buddha, suchness, the limit of reality, emptiness, signlessness, wishlessness, the unconditioned, all-conditioned, and unconditioned phenomena, samsara and nirvana, all speech and objects of speech, consciousness and objects of consciousness. In this way, as conventions are designated and connected, the relative conventions of the world are applied. Ultimately, however, all experiences are non-existent, and why? Children of noble family, ultimately all phenomena are utterly unborn, unarisen, and utterly unreal. The bodhisattva great beings were amazed. They rose from their seats and performed a very elaborate and unique worship of the blessed, thus gone, Worthy, perfect Buddha Śākyamuni. They bowed their heads to the feet of the Blessed One and said, Blessed One, in a manner beyond reference point, please emit your sound to all beings, a lion's roar, an especially exalted sound, the sound of the Supreme Leader, the sound of a great being, the sound of the genuine, the sound of thatness, the sound beyond reference point, the sound of the ultimate. Those bodhisattva great beings happily and joyfully circumambulated the blessed, thus gone worthy, perfect Buddha Śākyamuni several 100,000 times before finally departing from the presence of the Blessed One. Proceeding into the 10 directions, they donned in the manner of having no armor, the great armor of diligence beyond reference point. In this way they taught without teaching this Dharma teaching, which abides within the ultimate and relative truths. They taught this very Dharma Vinaya to tame all beings, and without establishing, they established these beings in the teaching. Mañjuśrī Kumarabuddha did not get up but remained on his seat, resting evenly in absorption. By means of his absorption, a light known as eradicating the reference points and ignorance of all beings shone forth above his head from his crown protuberance. As the light appeared, it illumined all the infinite Buddha realms within all the worlds of the 10 directions. The light rays caused the blessed, thus gone, worthy, perfect Buddha Śākyamuni to teach the Dharma, so that the teaching, on relying on both the relative and ultimate truth, was heard without being heard. In order to pay homage to all the Buddhas and the Bodhisattva great beings in all the infinite and limitless worlds in the 10 directions, the light produced clouds that rained down divine flowers, clouds that rained down divine fragrant herbs, clouds that rained down divine incense, clouds that rained down divine garlands, clouds that rained down divine unguents, clouds that rained down divine powders, clouds that rained down divine garments, clouds that rained down divine parasols, clouds that rained down divine standards, clouds that rained down divine banners, clouds that rained down divine victory banners, clouds that rained down divine canopies. There were clouds that rained down divine flowers, fragrant herbs, incense, garlands, unguents, powders, garments, parasols, standards, banners, victory banners, and canopies. Thus they sent forth clouds that rained down divine flowers, fragrant herbs, incense, garlands, unguents, powders, garments, parasols, standards, banners, victory banners, and canopies, that were all of the finest quality and produced all forms of excellent exuberance. Now Mañjuśrī Kumarabuddha emerged from his absorption in a manner beyond reference points. He circumambulated the blessed, thus gone worthy, perfect Buddha Śākyamuni several 100,000 times before he departed from this Saha world. The Blessed One now told Venerable Ananda, Ananda, you should uphold and propagate this Dharma teaching, which is the source of all Buddhas and Bodhisattva great beings. Venerable Ananda answered the Blessed One, Blessed One, I can indeed uphold this teaching, but I would be unable to propagate it. The reason, Blessed One, is that ultimately there are so many beings who cling to reference points. They also cling to physical matter, and they cling to substance, and it is extremely difficult to break them away from this mistaken grasping. The Blessed One said to Venerable Ananda, Ananda, all the blessed Buddhas in the past, present, and future have blessed without blessing this Dharma teaching. Ananda, you only need to act as a mere circumstance. Venerable Ananda asked him, Blessed One, what happens if a son or daughter of noble family should hear just a little of this teaching? The Blessed One replied, Ananda, it is based on this Dharma teaching that the thus gone one genuinely teaches, shows reality, shows the absence of reference points, shows the ultimate, and teaches without teaching. This teaching is inconceivable and limitless, Ananda. Whoever hears, without hearing, a very little of this Dharma teaching, even if just a single syllable, will encounter all the inconceivable and limitless teachings of the Buddha. Then Venerable Ananda asked the Blessed One, Blessed One, what is the name of this Dharma teaching? How should one apprehend it? The Blessed One said, Ananda, you should know this Dharma teaching as teaching the relative and ultimate truths. When the Blessed One had spoken, the Bodhisattva great beings, the great hearers, Venerable Ananda, and the entire retinue as well as the world with all its gods, humans, demigods, Gandharvas, rejoice and praise the Blessed One's teachings. This completes the noble Great Vehicle Sutra, teaching the relative and ultimate truths. Saṃvṛti paramārtha satya nirdeśa. Through this merit, may all beings attain the omniscient state of enlightenment and conquer the enemy of faults and delusion. May they all be liberated from this ocean of samsara and from its pounding waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Om Marapatsana Dio, 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 Marapatsana Di 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 Di.